forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Steve Deace here alongside my co-host, Aaron McIntire, and the season is drawing closer. I know you can feel it. Camp is in full swing. Next week on the show, we're going to do our Big Ten predictions for 2020, the season that almost wasn't, because the week after that, we've got a game week, and we've got games to preview. So this week, we're going to take a look at some of the major storylines for Big Ten teams going on with fall camp underway. Aaron, are you excited yet?
Oh, absolutely. And I know for somebody like me, it's really hard to detect in the tone of my voice because usually I sound like this and get off of my lawn. But no, oh my goodness, it's starting to feel real. I'm getting to have that feeling in the pit of my stomach like I usually do around August 1st, really. Middle of July when teams usually start to go to training camp. I'm starting to get that now, which I'm starting to enjoy because when this announcement was first made that we're actually going to have a season after all, I really didn't have that feeling there, but feeling's back, man. Feeling's back.
So let's get to it. The Big Five this week on Bigger Ten, we're going to look at some of the biggest storylines for teams in fall camps. Let's start with the opt-back-ins. All right, Pat Freiermuth back at Penn State. Jalen Mayfield back at the University of Michigan. Wyatt Davis and Sean Wade, likely first-round picks, back at The Ohio State University. And probably the biggest of them all, Rondale Moore back at Purdue, one of several big-name opt-back-ins. How do you think these may alter the Big Ten race this fall, Aaron?
Well, when it comes to somebody like Rondale Moore, you take a team in Purdue that was probably going to be pretty decent. I mean, they're on the uptick, they're on the upswing in West Lafayette, and you already had somebody like David Bell, right? Mm-hmm. Who was already going to be
the freshman of the year, freshman of the year, 2 years in a row.
He was already going to change that offense. Whoever was playing quarterback, when you have a skill at wide receiver like that. And so part of me wants to say that adding Rondale Moore, not really that big of a deal because he already had David Bell. But this is the type of opt back in where you have two of those guys, Steve. Yeah. You have two of those guys, and you go from, in a normal season, a normal 12-game season, you maybe go from 7 wins to maybe 9, 9.5, 10 wins, something like that. Maybe. Those are the type of difference makers because no matter how bad your defense is, if you have two of those guys, you're going to have a chance to be in almost every single game. I don't care who your quarterback is. If he can competently throw to one of those guys, that's going to be a huge addition. And then, of course, with Penn State as well, Freiermuth coming back in, that's probably a huge addition for them as well because I don't really know outside of Freiermuth.
It's not a big-time receiving core.
Yeah.
So he gives the quarterback there an instant target, an instant, not just a safety valve, but a guy that makes big plays down the middle.
Yeah, so that's a huge addition for Penn State. So I would say there's no question Rondale Moore coming back is probably the biggest addition because he's the biggest star that had a question mark next to his name in terms of coming back this season. Probably going to be the biggest name coming back, but don't underestimate how big of a deal Freiermuth coming back too is.
And somehow we forgot to mention the guy that was the Big Ten's receiver of the year last year, Rashad Bateman.
Yeah,
back at Minnesota. I mean, that's a big-time addition to that club as well. I mean, he went from opting out and then saying that he didn't think the Big Ten should play this fall to, all right, I'm in. But hey, you make those kinds of pendulum swings when you're 20, 21 years old, right?
Well, you make those kinds of pendulum swings when the guys in charge are making those kinds of pendulum swings as well. So.
Well said. All right, now, not all is rosy in the run for the Rose Bowl. See what I did there? Some players elected to stay out. Two at the University of Michigan, Ambry Thomas, their best corner, Nico Collins, their best receiver, are both opting out. From a Michigan fan's perspective, Michigan is loaded at wide receiver. Ambry Thomas is a big loss, especially given how much man coverage Michigan plays under Don Brown, and your very first game is against arguably the best receiving unit in the conference at Minnesota. If it's not them, they're no lower than in the top three. But no opt-out, Aaron, is bigger than Micah Parsons at Penn State. I think that changes the complexion of their entire defense. If I was going to put a point value on him from a point spread perspective, I think he matters more than any defensive player does to the point spread of a game in all of college football. I think he was kind of lined up to be this year's Chase Young, except Penn State doesn't have the depth that Ohio State flashed when Chase Young was suspended and banged up last year. So I think that is an absolutely massive loss for the Nittany Lions, and I think you're going to see Micah Parsons be the first defensive player taken off the board next spring in the NFL draft. So your thoughts on the players that chose to stay out once out?
Yeah, there's, again, much like Rondale Moore, there's no question that this guy Micah Parsons is the biggest loss for any of the teams who lost. And every single team is facing a bunch of opt-outs, or at least a couple of opt-outs anyway. But Micah Parsons, it's one thing if it's an NFL caliber defensive end or defensive lineman. Yeah, that could be a really big deal. That can be a huge deal. But when you're talking about the second line of the defense there, somebody who can move around and make plays on multiple areas of the field. There was talk he
was going to be the kick returner this year.
Yeah.
That's how fast, that's how explosive he is.
And that's what you're talking about, too, when it comes to impacting the point spread of the game in a way that other positions really, really don't as much, at least on defense. So absolutely a huge loss. And then Ambry Thomas at Michigan as well. That loss can't be understated either, I don't believe, because you're in a division. You're in a division with Ohio State, for one thing. And then does Michigan play Purdue this year?
No, we open with Minnesota.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin is our other crossover game.
So that's Minnesota. That's bad enough
We were originally going to open with Purdue with Schedule 2.0, remember?
But I was going to say, if you're Michigan and you're playing Purdue, which thankfully y'all don't, for your sake, don't play Purdue this year. That would have been an even bigger deal. But those two are who stand out to me.
I'm telling you, I think Micah Parsons could be worth up to a touchdown in the line.
Really?
I think that's how dominant he is on the other side of the ball because of what you just mentioned. All right. A Jadeveon Clowney, even a Chase Young. Ohio State beat us by 50 and Chase Young did nothing in the game. Okay. You can find ways around a singular edge rusher to game plan around them. Now, it takes you some out of your game plan, right? That's the trade-off. But if you want to, if an offensive coordinator wants to go in and say, hey, Chase Young's not beating me this weekend, you can game plan that way if you want. If an offensive coordinator wants to say, hey, this shutdown corner, we're just not throwing his way, you can do that. But imagine, and you may be too young to remember this name, but he wears his number. Imagine LeVar Arrington's athleticism, but in the middle of a defense, not coming off the edge. You cannot game plan around Micah Parsons. You can't get around his effect on a game because he's right in the thick of the mess. He's right in the middle of it. And he has generational type of explosiveness. So I think that's a massive loss for Penn State. Now, what about this loss as we move on to topic 3? They say these days the best ability is availability, right? Number one thing you ask any coach, hey, what's your goal with fall camp? Number one thing he's going to mention is what? Let's get out of here without any big injuries, key injuries, right? Well, we've already had one at the University of Wisconsin. Jack Cohn, who really came into his own last year as Wisconsin's quarterback, was a bit of a revelation for the Badgers. He has a foot injury. They're not saying what it is. They are saying, though, he had surgery on Monday. Now, what kind of surgery? And did he have to put a screw in there? We don't know. We don't know any of that other than he's out indefinitely, which tells me, if I had to guess, and that's all that this would be as a guess, is there some kind of a break there that they had had to repair, and then it's a matter of how quickly does the break heal after surgery, and then how much can he rehabilitate it to get the pain under control so that he can play football. And there's maybe no way of knowing this. This could be 4 weeks, could be the season. Now, if you're a Wisconsin fan, you were probably looking forward to seeing his successor anyway. Graham Mertz is the highest rated quarterback recruit Wisconsin has gotten, and I don't know how long. Certainly in the history of the rating service era online, if you don't count Russell Wilson as a recruit because he was a transfer. He's the highest rated recruit out of high school quarterback that they have ever had. And it's his turn now. Now, I don't know that there'll be a massive drop off there. I mean, given, how Wisconsin is won with a lot of guys named Jim Sorge and Jamie Samuelson, and these weren't guys that necessarily were lighting up, stat sheets. But then here's the thing though, what happens if Graham Mertz tests positive? What happens if Graham Mertz gets banged up, right? It definitely thins that room. And you're not handing off to Jonathan Taylor 30 times this year either. So your thoughts on this first big camp injury, which comes right out of your division there in the West?
It's 10 p.m. Do you know who your third string quarterback is? I mean, that would be the fear. But any team is going to be probably at some point this season figuring out who their third string left tackle or cornerback is, just because of the way injured. I mean, it's a violent sport. People get injured, and then on top of this, you got coronavirus precautions or guidelines in place as well. So I don't like the thought of Wisconsin with a better than average quarterback as an Iowa fan, and I don't think anybody in the Big Ten should. However, as you just mentioned, they don't have a Jonathan Taylor. I don't know who their next Jonathan Taylor is. I don't know
Maybe
who their
it's Jalen Berger, the big recruit out of New Jersey.
Yeah,
who knows?
I don't know who their next Melvin Gordon is, and so until they show that, hey, we're just reloading at running back again, I don't think there's enough fear right now to see what Wisconsin would be like with another Russell Wilson and who was it that played with Russell Wilson? I want to say it was Dane was before Russell Wilson, but whoever that running
James
back,
White would have been in the backfield.
Thank you.
Yeah, that team was freaking loaded.
Yeah,
and if it wasn't for a Hail Mary against Michigan State, and that team might have played for a national championship. Who knows? But. So
right now, as a Hawkeye fan and anybody in the Western Division, my fear is still not quite there as far as seeing Wisconsin with a better than average quarterback. But again, the last snaps Mertz played was in high school, and so until a guy really gets out there and really shows what he has, I'm going to be in a show me mode. So it's if everything they say about Mertz is true, I really don't want to see Wisconsin with both a great running back and a great quarterback, or at least above average quarterback. But they got to show me that first.
Let's go to issue 4 here in our Big 5 on Bigger 10 as we do our fall camp preview. I really think, and I was talking about this with Joe Hugan on the Hawkeye Nation podcast last week, that I think something that's missing from a lot of preseason analysis is the culture factor. The amount of buy-in that you have to have this year to do the swabs and the tests and the de facto bubble that these guys are going to live in, and no bye weeks on top of that, your schedule thrown off. I mean, these guys are used to doing fall camp before school even starts in any of our member institutions, right? Well, they're in the thick of semester or trimester work right now doing fall camp. I mean, everything that these guys are accustomed to, and their schedules are already very challenging to be a high-performing athlete at this level. And now you're throwing in all of this uncertainty as well. Then you take a look at Texas' situation. Nearly lost to Texas Tech, just lost to TCU, brand new coordinators on both sides of the ball. Those guys had no time to get their hands on their players at all. Think about new coaches that didn't have any of that time in the offseason to build that chemistry, build that rapport, and Zoom's better than nothing, but, virtual doesn't beat real either. I'd be looking at teams, look at this guy right here. Even when they're not good, like last year, they've got a culture there, right? Pat Fitzgerald. I'd be looking at teams who have a known identity, who the head coach and the brain trust are all back, so the system and everything is in place, and Did they have any issues in the offseason with any shutdowns for the virus, or from the very beginning were guys buying in? This time of year, in any year, fall camp is no news is Gary news, because coaches aren't going to tell you anything. They want to keep it all secret, right? So pretty much all the news that ekes out is bad, like a Jack Cohn type of an injury or something like that. I think culture is going to play a huge role this season. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
I tend to agree with that as well, but this is also an opportunity. I say that as if I'm contradicting something. It's not necessarily a contradiction. This is also an opportunity for new or fresher coaches to actually build a culture as well. Because you can look at your guys and say, hey, if you can get through this, look how much easier a normal season is going to look in the future as well. You can ingrain some even overly good habits in your players if they have that buy-in. Now, they got to buy in, but this can be a culture building opportunity, I think, for coaches as well. But I really also believe it can go one of two ways. If your season's already off the rails after 2 weeks, oh my!
How many guys are going to be like, man, I don't want it? It's happened at Florida State. They've had like a half dozen guys going to the transfer portal since they lost to Georgia Tech. And that just starts killing your depth, and because guys are like, do I want to take this freaking snob or swab every day, to play? If we're not any good, I'm just going to opt out now or hit the transfer portal now. I agree with you. I think that's another angle to this to keep in mind. Now, maybe the NCAA saying there's no requirements this year for W's to get to a bowl game, provided we have some form of a bowl season. And most bowl games aren't predicated on attendance anyway, but television ratings. So having a small crowd in there for a made-for-TV event isn't different than most bowl games nowadays, right? But maybe you dangle that carrot out there so you continue to have buy-in. But let's say Purdue gets off to a bad start. Rondale Moore already opted out when we didn't have daily testing, right? And all sorts of these things back in August. If Purdue gets off to a bad start, is he like, hey, I put a few games on tape. Everybody knows what I can do. 5,000 G-Pour went out. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But on the other hand as well, if you're a team like Purdue or Indiana even, or heck, Michigan State probably has no chance of doing this. But if you get off to like a 1 or 2-0 start, you can give that message to your team and say, hey, it's literally us against the world and a virus, pandemic, what have you. You can use that as motivation too. So it cuts both ways. But the bottom line is your team has got to be bought in.
This would be the perfect season. As I said on the Hawkeye Nation podcast recently, Aaron, this would be the perfect season for a team like yours, who has a more veteran coaching staff and who has a more embedded identity than Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa Hawkeyes, right? If we didn't have the racial animus and unrest in the offseason, and I don't have a clue how your team's going to respond to that. They might respond great, might have brought them closer together. We don't know because we're not there. And we're not going to know until we see them play and some adversity hit here in a few weeks, right? But if we didn't have Iowa kind of being ground zero for social justice warriors online for 2 months this offseason, and your program, getting a proctology exam as a result. If we didn't have this, but this was a typically quiet Iowa offseason except for Paula violations there in the 319, this would be the perfect season for a team like in Iowa. It's a perfect season for a team like a Wisconsin, except the starting quarterback just got hurt. And this is, again, the secret sauce for Ohio State. For how great they recruit and how much talent they have. What Urban, and Tressel started this and Urban took it to a different level. And Ryan Day has continued it so far. They really do have, it's not a me school. It's not like the U in the 80s or 90s. These guys really do buy into the college football culture at Ohio State, despite all of their 4- and 5-star press clippings and NFL draft aspirations. So I'd be looking at teams that have stability. Michigan has a lot of stability in its coaching staff, but does it have a culture? We don't know. Those are the things I'd be looking for this year, which brings us to the final thing we're going to talk about here with the Big 5 on Bigger 10. Is anybody on the hot seat? I mean, I can't imagine Scott Frost is getting fired in a pandemic year, right?
Right.
But look at that early schedule. They've gotten off to terrible starts his first 2 seasons. If they get off to another bad start, maybe guys start opting out. I don't know. I just don't think anybody. I don't think Lovie Smith's on the hot seat a year after taking Illinois back to a bowl game for the first time in 6 years. Can you think of somebody right now in our league that you would think is on the hot seat? I can't come up with a single coach.
The only one that I really thought of being close to is who you mentioned at first, and that's Scott Frost. But again, this whole season just has a feel of, even though they're taking it seriously, of course, it does have a feeling of, well, we're just kind of running an outside zone on 2nd and long, Iowa. This was just kind of mailing it in, packing it in this year. Just
we're running a draw on 3rd and long.
Yeah.
Hey, if you break a couple tackles and get to the sticks, great.
Yep.
But we're totally fine punting here.
Yep.
That does kind of feel
Precisely.
that way. Yeah,
Precisely.
It does. Okay. All right, we'll come back, play our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather here next. All right, let's fire it up. It's our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. And Aaron, this very first one is for you. Would you rather have teams incentivized to keep up with safety protocols by counting games they can't play as forfeits, or leave things as they are right now?
Leave things as they are right now. I really dislike the idea of forfeiting games because people caught a virus. Now, we do have to be a little bit discriminating here. And when it comes to protocols, now if you're going out and partying with your friends, now that's kind of dumb. That's really dumb. I would be more in favor of go doing the party bus. What was that? Memphis few weeks ago.
Which they denied it.
They denied it.
See.
But that was the story anyway.
Yeah.
If you're doing a party bus, that's dumb anyway. That's dumb.
Remember when Rutgers had the party issue when the players first returned in the summertime for off-season training? Yeah.
So that's dumb. But if you just have an outbreak and everybody's doing things fine, even though okay, maybe I like the Titans did earlier this week. They were apparently going off site and working out because it's in the middle of a football season. They got to work out somewhere.
And the facility is closed.
Facility was closed.
Yeah.
Are you really going to forfeit? No, that's dumb. It's a pandemic. It's a virus. And so I'm really skittish about causing teams to forfeit games if there's an outbreak, because that's what we're talking about.
See,
if there's an outbreak,
I'm for it. Yeah. You make a good case, and I don't disagree with it. But I think in the scenario we're in, I think we need to incentivize as much caution as possible. So I'm for it. But I think you made a pretty strong case against it as well. All right, let's get to the first one you have for me.
This one's for you going into the season. Would you rather be the coach of a developmental program or a reloading program?
I think I'd rather be the coach of a developmental program.
Absolutely.
Because the expectations for me are nothing. I don't have a year right now. Coach Tucker at Michigan State doesn't have a year one. He gets a year zero. Coach Schiano at Rutgers doesn't have a year one. It's a year zero. So that kind of adds a year onto your contract if you're a rebuilding program. I think we got next year, if there wasn't some turnaround there at Maryland, you might have seen some pressure on the coach there. But I think this year is a mulligan. So I'd rather have the added margin for error by being given the benefit of the doubt with an asterisk year like we're going to get this year.
And if you're a developmental program as well, Steve, you've got a bunch of guys on your team. This year doesn't count towards their scholarships.
Or their eligibility. You're exactly right.
Just throw anything.
Play everybody.
Yeah.
Play everybody.
Yep.
Meanwhile, if you're one of the reloading schools, I mean,
your
Penn State,
expectations are going to be high.
The same. You still have to. Penn State's still a top 10 team. I mean, if they lose 2 or 3 games, their fans are going to be disappointed. Michigan doesn't get to the Big Ten championship under Harbaugh again. I can promise you, their fans are going to be disappointed. They're not going to say, "But the virus." They're not going to do that. So yeah, I completely agree. All right, next one for you. Would you rather be able to watch a Big Ten football game in person with a mask, or continue not allowing the fans the whole season? What do you think?
I'd wear a mask to a game. I'd love to go to a game. I've got a buddy who lives in Iowa City now, who's got an extra bedroom,
so I
could stay
perfect
overnight.
Scenario.
The perfect scenario, and I know he would be fine with me wearing a mask too. I think masks are stupid. They don't work. They're dumb. But I would still wear one if I got to see a moderately priced Iowa football game in Kinnick Stadium. I get to listen to AC/DC while they're walking out of the tunnel. That's a freaking cool experience. Wave at the kids at the end of all of the game day traditions.
Yeah.
I'd wear a mask for that. But Man, I feel so dirty saying that. I feel like such a sellout. But that's the reality. I think Gary Barta, the Iowa athletic director, came out recently and said something about there being some quote unquote wiggle room when it comes to fans in the stands.
Yeah, there's
going to Big Ten. So.
Something tells me shortly after November 3rd. We're going to have some fans in the stands in Big Ten games. Yeah, I don't know. Just kind of pick that date off the top of my head. Just, random. Yeah.
So weird. So weird. Next one and last one for you. Would you rather be Graham Mertz or Spencer Petras?
I'd rather be Spencer Petras because there's a history of my program doing excellent with first-year starting quarterbacks and getting them ready on the fly.
Not to mention your receiving core.
And I think, Iowa, this is as good a receiving core as Iowa's had probably since you had McNutt and DJK together, I would imagine. And you have a stud in the backfield, a game breaker there too. I have it rated right now the number 1 offensive line in the Big Ten, but I got Graham Mertz running behind what I think is the number 2 offensive line in the Big Ten. But Petras has also been prepared to be the number 1 guy all offseason. Mertz is just now getting prepped for that spot. So I'd rather be Spencer Petras. That's a good question, though. All right, we'll come back with our Twitter poll results and our question of the week next. This week's Twitter poll results here on Bigger 10. Who was the biggest opt back in? Rondale Moore, not surprisingly, the overwhelming choice at 72%. I don't, not to besmirch. I mean, Rashad Bateman doesn't have to take a backseat to anybody, for example. Okay. I mean, Shaun Wade's going to be the first Big Ten cornerback taken in the next in the next draft. But this one, I think, was pretty simple, Aaron.
There's no question about that. And I could have made the same case or a similar case for Rashad Bateman that I did for Rondale Moore, but it's like compounding interest when you add Rondale Moore with David Bell or vice versa, David Bell with Rondale Moore. And with Minnesota's, I just think that the overall ceiling for a program or for a team with both Bell and Moore is higher than Rashad Bateman and whoever the other cast of receivers are at Minnesota.
I think you could also say Rondale Moore is the one guy on that list that you could make an argument and maybe make a winning argument. Not saying it is the winning argument, but you could potentially make a winning argument. He's the best player in the Big Ten, regardless of position.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
I think he's at the very least, you can make that argument if it's not the winning argument. All right, this week's question of the week here on Bigger 10 is not a question. I just had to point out this panic porn, okay? Pro Football Talk tweeting out over the weekend that the Saints, who are in Detroit, have a player who has tested positive. Turned out to be their backup fullback, by the way, who has tested positive for COVID-19. Testing currently is occurring of those who were in contact with the player who was on the flight from New Orleans. No one else tested positive. Turned out Mr. Michael Burton had a false positive, and so the game was played. Jerry Palm. Now, I've known Jerry for years. Used to be on my old sports show in Des Moines constantly. Smart guy, okay? Purdue grad, engineer, knows his math. If you want to know bracketology and the BCS, the old BCS formula, dude knew his stuff. But look at what he says in response to this, okay? Another game to postpone perhaps. Pretty soon, there won't be any left. Guys, of the first 64 games in the NFL, 2 of them got postponed. 2 out of the first 64 games. 2 of them did. If I would have predicted before the season began in the NFL that only 2 of its first 64 games would get postponed because of COVID, you folks would have said, you're dumber than Clay Travis, right? That's what y'all would have said, right? And yet, that's the number. 2 out of 64. Aaron, I needed to highlight that panic porn because soon our league, and Jerry is a part of our league, Purdue grad, big Boilermaker fan. Soon, we're going to be playing with daily testing like in the NFL, no bye weeks, and they only have 1 in the NFL. So we're going to have to endure this level of panic porn on a week-to-week basis probably in the Big Ten.
There are few words at this point that just I'm dumbfounded by the dumb. advocating for canceling or not advocate, whatever you want to call it, another game to postpone. Advocating canceling a game because the backup fullback, you said?
Yes.
The backup fullback.
Maybe he's the starting fullback. I don't know. I didn't know the Saints had a damn fullback.
I didn't know the Saints had a fullback. I didn't know a backup fullback was actually a thing. I just thought that was called the right guard or the backup right guard. Backup fullback had what ended up being a false positive. Cancel the game. Cancel all the games. Okay, Wonder Boy, false positive. God, cancel the games. Team mascot, cancel the games. Starting quarterback's pet dog tests positive. Cancel all the games. You got to cancel. I'm enjoying this season despite these fools.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm even enjoying the season more because of these fools.
So we have identified another Corona bro. Isn't that Clay Travis's name for him?
Yep.
Again, 2 out of the first 64 games in the NFL have been postponed. 2 out of 64. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Bigger 10. Next week, we go on the record, our predictions of what we think is going to happen this Big Ten football season, who wins the East and the West, and more coming your way next week here on Bigger 10. Until then, for Aaron McIntire, I'm Steve Deace.